You're listening to Back Pew Convos.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Sal. And this is the podcast God wants you to listen to.
So if you want to remain in God's will, have a sit down.
Grab a beverage of your choice.
And have a listen.
You're welcome.
Loose cannons, huh?
Loose cannon. Some would say loose cannon. Some would say heretic. Some would just probably call me an idiot.
Some might say the nicest old gal on the block.
Maybe.
That's what Dennis the Menace would say. You don't get that reference, huh?
No. Is it Dennis the Menace with Walter Matthau in it?
Yeah, it's that one.
I have seen it, but I just probably not since I was like 8 years old. So
yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, I guess.
Don't think our sound pads work, or I would cuss you.
It worked.
I'd give you a cussing.
It did work that one time.
So yes, and then the next time I don't think it did.
Okay. Well,
unless I'm lying.
That's possible. If not, then it's just going to make you look like an idiot.
Yeah, I'm just taking pauses. And there's nothing happening. See, we can't really fake it like that as much anymore because people can see my mouth moving, so they know I'm not saying words.
Yeah, it's true. Or you could just start saying them.
They know I'm not saying fudge.
If you're going to uphold your reputation, you could just start saying the words.
Frankenbeans.
Frankenweenie.
What kind of reputation do you want? Do you want to be known as a low-down, dirty sinner?
Is that what you want to be doing when Jesus comes back? Making fun of poor old Joe Dirt.
I don't personally want to be making fun of Joe Dirt whenever the good Lord comes back.
Joe Dirte, don't you church it up, boy.
My. Sassafras.
Sassafras.
That's a weird word, huh?
Yeah, it is. So what's up with you?
I don't know. I'm tired.
You know what? You made me alter my mic stand, and now I don't feel like I can get it right. There we go. That's better.
I'm so tired.
Why are you tired?
I'm tired because I'm tired because I think it's because I started lifting again this week. So I lifted yesterday, and whenever you're meal prepping and doing all that stuff, you just don't like. But when I get home, I just don't sit down, just going nonstop.
Right.
As soon as I get home, I'm trying to get things prepared for supper last night and for like my meals today, and getting my pre-workout and all that stuff in, and then getting my workout in, and then coming in and finishing cooking everything and all of that, and then you get a shower real quick, and we went to the volleyball game, and by the time we got home it was bedtime.
Yeah, it was.
And then I got up over an hour earlier than I normally do this morning so that I could get a workout in today. And then I ran when I got home. So, yeah, I'm just tired.
Yeah, well, I feel pretty good right now.
Well, Lottie freaking da.
I did get up and do my workout this morning. I did some squats, which I have to say. Normally I run before, and I like to run on an empty stomach. I like doing a fasted run. But since I didn't know if I was going to have time this afternoon, because I had to take our car to get the oil changed in it, and we were going to record tonight, I just didn't know what kind of time I would have. So I went ahead and did like a 15-minute run this morning, just something to get the blood pumping, and then came down here to do squats. And let me just say that squats, semi-heavy squats for me, at 5 a.m., fasted, sucks. Straight up, no other way to say it.
Bad idea, huh?
Sucks. Not enjoyable. Do not recommend. But I got through it. I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here we are.
Indeed.
One tired, one semi-tired. Feeling pretty okay.
Both probably not really sure what we want to talk about tonight.
Yeah, it's a little bit different than usual because usually when we come down here and to record an episode and we say that, we mean we haven't picked a topic out. We don't really know what we're going to talk about. That's not really the case this time. We've kind of actually already had a conversation about our topic last night, or what we had talked about having as our topic. It's not that we don't know a topic, it's that we just don't know what to say about it or what we want to say about it. Or I don't want to say we, I don't want to speak for you, but
I don't know what I have to say about it. I think it's sort of complicated-ish. I mean, it is and isn't.
well, that's ultimately why it popped into my head as a potential topic to talk about. Is because it is a difficult topic, can be. There's a little bit of tension involved. I think if anybody's being honest and not just trying to be dogmatic towards their own position, then they would admit that it is a complicated topic, one that isn't quite as black and white as maybe everybody wants to make it, depending on what side of an argument that you're on, you know?
Right. Yeah. So, like, what we were talking about was the old trope, the whole love the sinner, hate the sin.
Yeah.
We kicked around the idea of talking about loving sin and hating sinners
We did think about that.
for about half a second.
I guess we're not going to go that route, but no, so I was out for my run on Sunday and randomly for whatever reason I was listening to something, but I was listening to it in the background. I wasn't really paying attention. I don't even remember what it was I was listening to, but I heard someone mention that. And I was thinking about it from the point of view of the episode that we've recently released about the wrath of God, right? God's wrath, and how we talked about that we both believe that the wrath of God is a real thing, but it's not directed at individuals, right? The sinner.
Right.
But it's directed at that thing that's keeping you from realizing your identity as a beloved child of God, or keeping you from that relationship with God, that union with God, or whatever, however you would prefer to phrase it. That's the whatever that is that's between you and God. That's the thing that God's wrath is directed at, right? His wrath's directed to destroy that barrier. Well, from that perspective, I mean, that does sound like hate the sin, love the sinner, right? It's right. You're so beloved that his wrath is directed at the thing, which I suppose that's what we would identify as sin.
Yeah.
So then that probably sounds clear cut to a lot of people. They're like, yeah, of course, that's why we say that. But the reason why I say there's a bit of tension in that is because of the way that phrase has been used, and also the way that we talk about people. Like a lot of times when we use that phrase and we talk about individuals, we have a hard time differentiating between the sin and the sinner. You know what I mean? So there does seem to be that tension of like it is a legitimate topic, a legitimate thing to, like, if you define it in the way that we just did, then it's a legitimate phrasing, I guess you would say, but it has to be executed properly.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So something that came to mind whenever you were just saying that is I do wonder, this is something that's not occurred to me quite in the same way that it did just now, but maybe there are certain things that are not sin that are preventing you from being who you were created to be. It depends on who you were created to be. It depends on what your true identity is. It depends on what God's plan actually is for your life, and if you're aligning yourself with that plan, and like, I guess it kind of, if you're swimming against the current, it doesn't necessarily mean that what you're doing. It may not necessarily. it may not, well, necessarily is right. It may not be dependent upon, like, it doesn't have to be sin, I guess is what I'm thinking. Like, maybe there could be things that aren't sin that are, in fact, preventing you from being who you were intended to be.
Well, I definitely think when I was thinking through this topic earlier today, that's kind of one of the main things that stood out to me as like in order to even have a discussion as to what that phrasing means,
Right.
you have to sort of define sin, which I know that we did a full episode on that several weeks ago. You know, it's been a while now, probably a few months ago that we did that episode, but I think it's necessary in order to have the conversation of to love the sinner, but hate the sin. You have to be able to identify sin, or
Love the sin and hate the sinner.
yeah.
I mean,
And even in saying that, that's kind of part of where my unease with the whole topic comes in, is saying to be able to identify sin, right? Like to be, because when you say that you're going to hate the sin but love the sinner, what that indicates is that you are able to identify all the sins in that person's life. You're able to identify what is sin, which is I think why that phrase has been used in the past and it's so triggering to some people, is because it could be used as you, let's just say for example you use it at me talking at like some, you know, like you love me but you hate this about me because that's sin. Well, I don't believe that's sin. That's not the way I understand it. So then that creates that tension between me and you know what I mean?
right.
So I do think that you have to be able to define sin, and that's, I mean, it's a valid conversation. What does that even mean, right?
Right. Yeah, because there are certain things that are listed as like works of the flesh. So are the works of the flesh the same thing as sin?
Right.
Um, and like the thing is, a lot of those things that are listed as the works of the flesh, I mean, are pretty obvious
Yeah.
things that like I think most people would say, yeah, that's not right.
See, I actually think the way, and maybe, I mean, this is something we could talk about. Maybe you could talk me out of it. I don't know. But
Maybe.
I actually tend to view like something like the works of the flesh not being sinful inherently, like as in and of themselves. They are the fruit of sin. Just like the fruit of the spirit isn't, it's just the visible, tangible, you know, manifestation of living and abiding in the spirit, right? So like I think that perhaps the things like the works of the flesh that we would maybe look at these individual actions and call sins are actually just the fruit
Of living
of
in the
living
flesh.
in a sinful state, or living in the flesh, or however you want to phrase it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it sort of goes back to, like I've said a few different times, about the fall of man, right? Like a lot of people want to identify the partaking of the forbidden fruit as the fall itself, as the thing that caused the fall. But the way that I tend to view that is that's just the result of the fall. The actual cause of that was buying into the delusion of the serpent. But the result of that was partaking in the fruit, right? To me, that's sort of a parallel of the works of the flesh. Like the sin is buying into that delusion, but
Yeah.
the works that come thereof are fruit.
Yeah.
Which I think the reason why it's called works of the flesh and not fruit is because we kind of associate fruit with good, right? Fruit is good, so
Yeah.
but it's the same
Right.
principle.
Um, so maybe you could say that the works of the flesh aren't sin, but maybe you could say that they are sinful.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what I would personally probably be more comfortable with. Like those, they're not. And I kind of view sin from that way. That there's sin, to me. Sin isn't individual thing. And maybe again, maybe there's more levels to this. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but to me, it's not individual things that you do. Like, oh, I sinned 18 times today because I did this and did this. They're all
18. You are going to hell, buddy.
you got to pump
Easy.
those are rookie numbers. You got to pump those
Easy.
numbers up. But like I don't necessarily conceptualize sin like that. I don't see it as like the individual actions that you do so much as like those individual actions being the result of living in sin, of being in a sinful state. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Having your mind. I mean, this is what Jesus says to Peter, right? He says, "Get behind me, Satan." Literally like a couple sentences after he praised him and for
Right.
for he asked the disciples, who do people say I am? And then Peter is the one that gets it right, and he's like kind of bragging on him as like, man has not revealed this to you but God. And then like literally the next thing that happens is Jesus tells them like is like, hey, just so you guys know, I'm gonna die. And Peter's like, sidebar, Jesus, we gotta talk this out. And Jesus rebukes him, says, "Get behind me, Satan." He says, "You have your mind set on the concerns of man and not of God."
Right.
So within just a couple lines there, he goes from having man didn't reveal this to you, this come directly from God, to your mind is set on the concerns of man and not of God's. you know. And so like, yeah, I think that is the satanic, right? That's the is having your mind set on the concerns of the flesh, the things that that aren't going to matter, the things that rust, you know.
Right.
Uh,
Which really, if you think about those things that are generally, like you said, most of the things that are included in those lists of works of the flesh or, whatever sinful things that we would describe as that fit that mold, right? Like greed.
right,
That's
yeah,
fulfilling the lust of your flesh, right? That's living from a place of putting yourself above others. That's not from you don't become greedy from living out of a place of agape love for others,
right,
where you put others ahead of yourself, right? That's the exact opposite of that.
right,
Or murder, where you're taking someone else's life.
yeah,
You don't murder someone in agape,
right,
right? So like most of those things, stealing, that's you take your desires, you place your desire to have something above someone else
right,
by taking their thing. So most of those things fit that mold
right,
as far as like if you just look at the base level of teaching of Jesus, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. Well, everything else kind of flows out of that.
right, yeah,
Almost everything.
yeah. Um, See, I don't know where to go next actually,
Yeah.
because
I think you just need to trust the spirit and let him lead you and guide you in all things.
well, so we've already talked a little bit about this last night is the thing. So there are things though that maybe aren't as obvious. Um,
You'll notice that's why I said most.
right. Yeah.
Generally.
But I don't know what we do and don't want to get into right now. Um,
Right.
like there's included in those lists, there's, adultery, there's sexual immorality, and then you have to define like what is that? What is sexual immorality? What does it
Right.
mean to behave in a way that is both sexual and immoral?
I mean, I can get into sexual ethics if you would like to.
But yeah, I mean,
To me, the way that I look at anything, again, this is just me, but I try to view it through that lens of loving your neighbor as yourself. So even sexual things, right? There are like for example, you listed adultery. Like
right,
to have adultery would be putting my desires above
right,
my wife is also my neighbor. I'm supposed to love my
right,
my my neighbor as myself. That includes my wife. Well, if she expects me to be monogamous with her and I
right,
sneak behind her back
right,
and am not monogamous,
yeah,
then that's placing my desires above her.
yeah,
That's loving myself more than I love her.
right,
Right. And so, yeah, that's sinful.
right. Well, I mean, and that's what Paul says about marriage. He says to for husbands to love your wives the way that Christ loves the church. In other words, like self-sacrifice,
Right.
giving of yourself.
So that's why I mean, really, we kind of joked around about talking about sexual ethics, but that really is my sexual ethic is like love your neighbors yourself. I try to make that my personal sexual ethic for anything, which, whatever. But
Right. Which, and I mean, the thing is, like, but to your point before about like there being individual things that can stem from that,
right,
right? Because, I mean, pornography, things like that, like the things, there's different things that can stem from that fall into that same category, like if your spouse views that as the same as adultery,
right.
then yeah, that's
Or if it's tangibly causing you to your tension in your relationship in
right.
some
Yeah.
way, right? There are scientific, studies that will, and I haven't studied up on this, so I don't know, for sure, I guess, but I have heard before that, like, I mean, even I'm pretty sure that in all those murder serial killer documentaries that Kelly watches, that like that's one of the things that's like common within serial killers is like
Right.
a porn addiction because it like does mess with your brain in that
Yeah.
way. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So it can mess with your relationship with your family and your wife and
Right.
screw you up in that way to where like yeah it's not just like a harmless thing that's not affecting anyone else. It
Right.
can be a harmless thing that's not affecting anyone else, maybe, I don't know, but it's
Maybe.
not always.
Yeah. I think more often than not, it's probably
Right.
going to be harmful in some way or another.
I just don't like to speak in absolutes
Yeah.
generally, but yeah.
Even if it's just a matter of like, even if you're not even with someone, if you're not, even if you're single, I think it could be harmful because I don't think it's like, I think it puts a certain expectation.
Well, yeah, I mean our brains are just weird, man. Like our brains, the way that the thing we have no, they're the one thing in your body. Like I don't want to say the one thing because we have all these other internal organs too. But I mean, for us, like that's one of the things from football, right? It's like you don't you if I have a hurt ankle or a hurt knee or a hurt shoulder or whatever, like that's I can feel that pain and I can recognize that pain. But if when I've done damage in my brain to in some way, there's no way to know that. You know what I mean? So we don't know what those effects
Right.
are,
Yeah.
how that's changed, especially like when we're talking about like teens and people, young adults, people whose like prefrontal cortex is still developing, and
Right. Yeah.
like we don't know what kind of behavioral things that are being ingrained. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's extremely harmful.
Right. Yeah.
This is, I think it goes along with this whole conversation the way it's flowing perfectly because it came to my mind earlier when you were talking about maybe the things keeping you separated aren't necessarily sin. Is my mind immediately went to the verse in James, which is like, to those who know to do right and do it not, to them it is sin,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I don't have that pulled up in front of me. I don't necessarily know offhand what the context
Context is.
is of that, but there is a way of reading that if you old McDonald it and pull it out to where like it's not that there is a list like a universal law, right? A Torah, a law that is set in stone, set in spiritual stone, I guess, of like this is the list of sins. These things are sins and everything else is permitted. It could be perhaps more of one of those things of like, depending on who you are, this is right for you or wrong for you. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that like dogmatically. I don't know. Again, I haven't. I assume you're pulling it up, but I don't have it pulled up here. But there is a way of reading it that makes it seem like that, right? Which going back to my analogy of a sexual ethic of simply loving your neighbor as yourself, and like if you're in a monogamous relationship, to stray outside the bands of that relationship could be sinful. But if you're not in a monogamous relationship, then is it sinful for you to have multiple partners like it would be for someone in a monogamous relationship? You know what I mean? Like, and maybe the answer is yes. I don't know. I'm not giving out sexual advice here by any means.
Yeah.
But it's something to think about, especially if the standard is loving your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I was trying to read through some of this to get some context on it. Mm. So he's talking about humility and worldliness. He's talking about not judging your brother. Do not speak evil of one another. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and destroy. Who are you to judge another? Um, yeah. So, and then he goes on to talk about essentially people that are, it seems that people that are kind of like just shrugging it off, like, oh, it's fine, whatever. And then it says, therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. Basically saying like you're you can shrug it off if you want, but you are sinning. You are committing sin.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, I didn't want to read the whole thing.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, and I wanted to be clear to point out that we didn't have, that I hadn't read it, that it just came to my mind while we were talking, so I didn't know offhand what the context is. But I mean, because the only other way that I mean, I don't want to say the only other, but traditionally, the way that I understood that verse as it was taught to me was sort of like the age of accountability, right? Like, well, if you know to do right and do it not, you're held accountable. But if you don't know any better,
Yeah.
I don't know how much sense that makes either, because then it's like, well, then why are we telling everybody about it?
Right.
If that's truly the case, is it not better to just be ignorant?
Right.
So that doesn't make a lot of sense for me.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing that we've talked about before when it comes to like hell and stuff like that, like in spreading the gospel. It's like, I mean, if I wasn't going to be held accountable, like if I would have been okay before this person came and told me,
Right.
spread the gospel to me, like maybe you should just left me alone
Right.
and not said anything.
Right.
If if now I have this burden to make sure that I believe the right thing or I'm going to go to hell, then maybe you just shouldn't have said anything.
Right. The
If I
risk
didn't know
to
before.
the sounds to me like the risk to reward ratio there's a little bit higher than maybe
Right.
some are willing to pay.
Yeah. And that's obviously dealing with very simplistic
Right.
views of all of that, but still,
Right.
it is something that I've had thought about previously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even Jesus said something sort of similar to that, right? You think you pointed it out in the last time where he was like,
Oh yeah.
if I hadn't have come to reveal
They
something,
would have no guilt.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But now that I have come, they have no excuse. Yeah. Well, maybe you shouldn't have come, Jesus. I mean, if we wouldn't have been guilty.
right. Yeah, there's definitely ways of reading it to where you're like, I don't know.
But then we wouldn't have life,
True.
I suppose. But see, things like that, I think, make way more sense to me now. I mean, it's still a sort of like weird thing to say.
Yeah.
But like, only if you're reading it or thinking about it in a certain paradigm. Because like, just the way I think about it now, it's like, well, like, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to say this without it coming across a certain way. Being that I'm a universalist, like if I was someone who really thought that like your salvation was completely dependent on you and your knowledge,
Right.
and now that you have this knowledge, you're screwed now if you don't believe the right things. Like if I believed that, then that passage would bother me more in that way.
Yeah, for sure.
It would be more of a thing where I'd be like, well, why did you even come, Jesus?
Right.
But like, I understand that like that's the whole purpose. Jesus isn't plan B, as we talked about that upstairs a little bit.
Right.
Like Jesus was always the plan. The plan was always to unite God and man. The plan was always for Jesus to uphold our end of the covenant. The man he upholds both God and man's
Right.
part of the covenant. Like,
I shall be your God, and you shall be my children. It's
yeah,
both.
yeah. Like so like that's why it was necessary. I mean, it was always necessary for him to come, even if there was no sin. Like, I believe that. Like, I think it was, I think it was Maximus that said that Christ would have, that Jesus would have come among us, even if there had been no sin, because the plan was always to unite
Right.
God and man together in this person named Jesus. So, like, you know, whether we would or wouldn't have had guilt if he didn't come, like, it's, I mean, it was always the plan for him to be here, and none are righteous, but God will be on all.
It
So
kind of this conversation here kind of makes me think about something that else that we'd mentioned last night, which is when we had talked about like people in Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever. Like the first step to that is admitting that
yeah,
you are an addict, right, or have a
right,
problem, and it's the same sort of thing. The way that I sort of view that with guilt is the same sort of thing, right? Like if there's, it's you're gonna get those things. I mean, and it tracks along with what we mentioned at the beginning, at the onset of this episode, with the wrath of God being directed at whatever it is that's keeping you separated. Like even if it brings you, even if your result to that wrath attacking whatever that is within you, dealing with that, and it manifests as guilt, like that's just something that has to be dealt with. Like the refiner's fire, burning stuff out, cutting stuff out of you isn't always pleasant, but it's necessary.
right,
You know what I mean? So I don't know that. uh, But again, to your point, if you're approaching it from a mind frame of like this is all about the afterlife, and if you're either going to the good place forever or you're going to burn and suffer for all of eternity, well, yeah, I guess if that's your paradigm, then it would have been better to just stay away.
yeah, right,
You know?
yeah. That's why, like, it really is funny because, like, that seems like something that wouldn't, like, that's not something that you'll ever hear like Christian Universalists talk about. That, like, that passage never comes up in any debates on hell
Right.
or anything. But like, the it is a thing that, like, there is just a paradigm shift. There's a way of reading the scriptures that really does make a, like, with this understanding that God will actually be all in all. That, like, Paul meant it when he wrote 1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah.
Like, that that having that as your understanding of the end, like that really does bring out things like that in the scripture that maybe wouldn't have made sense to me otherwise, but now they don't
Yeah,
mess with me.
you don't have to read straight over it. Like sometimes when
Yeah.
that's what that seems to be my default. Sometimes when I come across a passage and I don't know what to do with, it's like I'm not ready to deal with that right now. I'm just going to keep reading.
Yeah. Man, I had some notes, and I had my notes in my pocket, and I cannot find them now. They're just not there anymore.
What a bum.
I know. I don't. They must have fallen out of my pocket somewhere.
I hope there was no passwords or secrets in there.
Secrets. Only the secrets in my heart.
He's going to pour out the secrets of your heart for the people of YouTube and Spotify.
Well, so, like, I just I had some stuff today that I thought was pretty good. That I thought if it came up, I would share. And since we were kind of talking about universalism anyway,
Yeah.
um, like, I looked up because I was listening to that Damon sermon that you sent me,
Yeah.
and I got sidetracked because he started talking about Abraham. He mentioned Abraham, and the promise made to Abraham is that his children would be more numerous, more in number than the sands of the sea and of the stars in the sky. And so I was like, hmm, I wonder. I was like, I wonder what the actual numbers are on that. So, like, I went and looked it up, and it's like, that's why I wanted my notes. But I think it was like, like, as far as like how much the sand, like grains of sand, there's like supposedly like 7.5 followed by 17 zeros, whatever that ends up being, like a sectillion or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, that's how many, that's how much sand in the seas. And then there was like, I think it was 100 followed by 24 zeros, which is, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's how many.
Pretty big.
That's how many stars they estimate that there are. But I mean, they don't know. There's way more than that.
Right.
But they don't know exactly. But that's their best guess is that it's 100 followed by 24 zeros.
Right.
There's 8 billion people that are alive right now, and I looked up like estimates of like within human history how many people have lived, and it was I think it was like 108 billion people is the estimate.
We got a ways to go.
Right. Right. But like, and that's one of those things that like, again, it's one of those like throwaway verses. Like you just like, oh, it's like a lot, you know, and you just kind of leave it at that. Oh, more numerous than the sands of the sea and the stars in the sky. Well, huh, that's a lot.
It's one of those things when you start using examples like that our mind just has a hard time understanding. I
Yeah.
seen a thing the other day, and this guy was talking about like if our solar system was about the size of my hand here, like a grown man's hand,
Right.
the whole hand here is our solar system. How big do you think the Milky Way galaxy is in scale to our solar system being the size of my hand?
The size of this house.
It's the size of the North American continent.
Oh, well, there you go.
And there are thousands of observable universes. I mean, galaxies.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy.
So that just to give your like that gives your mind like it's unfathomable.
Yeah. Stuff like that'll make you just like, wow, man,
Yeah.
who are you? Who is man that you would care for them or whatever? You know the verse I'm
Yeah.
talking about. I can't
Yeah.
remember exactly how it's worded, but like, yeah. But anyway, I was looking at those numbers and I was like just thinking, man, I mean, if Abraham's children, which I mean, apparently you become a child of Abraham, you're grafted into it's like what Paul says in
Yeah.
Romans about the Gentiles being grafted into this tree. Like if you
Right.
become a child of Abraham, if Gentiles become children of Abraham by faith, and his children are supposed to outnumber the stars and the sand of the sea, like I don't see how anyone's getting away.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't see. I mean, I know that we're not supposed to take those numbers literally, I guess, but still, like, if you do though, if you do actually think about the numbers of it,
I don't
like,
think you
how could everyone not be saved?
I don't think you have to take it literally to like still use the literalness of it to put it in a better perspective than you would by just saying, well, that's a lot.
Right?
No, you don't understand when you say a lot. You don't
Yeah.
you get a little bit more context to it.
Yeah.
Then you can finally kind of bring out. I understand it's not an exact number, but when you say a lot, you still don't understand.
Yeah. No, like the promise given to Abraham is not just a lot. It's like a lot, a lot.
It's unfathomable. Really.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So much. I mean, even because I mean, if think about Abraham's response whenever God tells him to count the stars, and he's like, I can't. There's too many. Well, what does that mean? It means that there's just too many to count. There's,
Right.
and this is exactly what it says in Revelation when it says that again it goes back to John and what he heard versus what he saw. Right? He heard a distinct number, a limited amount.
Right.
But when he turned and looked, he saw a multitude that no one could count.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, so I was thinking about that a little bit today in terms of like universal salvation. It's like, yeah, I mean, I don't see how you talk your way out of that being, especially if you're someone who takes the whole narrow road means only a few people are going to be saved. Like some people have even went so far as to put an actual number on it, like 20%, like maybe 20% of people are going to be saved and everyone else is going to be eternally damned.
Right.
It doesn't sound like that's outnumbering any sands of. I mean, we're talking about like maybe a mile's worth of beach in Florida somewhere is
On the
saved.
Emerald Coast.
Right.
Yeah.
Versus all of the sands of the whole seas of the world. Like,
Right.
but anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, the promise given to Abraham makes no sense if it's such a small amount.
Right. Sounds to me like God's just talking a lot of smack if that's the case.
Yeah, blowing smoke.
Yeah, blowing smoke. Back that up. Back them words up.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, we got off on a tangent.
A little bit.
It was a good one, though. It was a good tangent.
Yeah.
Sometimes tangents are needed. So, we were talking about...
Loving sin and hating sinners.
Yeah.
Because, if everyone knows that progressive Christians and universalists especially just love sin
Yeah, man.
and hate sinners. Because if we loved sinners, we would tell them the truth.
That's why I went through deconstruction.
Yeah.
Just so I could sin.
I love it.
So I could let sin abound in my life.
I love it.
Yeah,
Anyway.
so...
Sorry. I should have brought another one. He's down here. A thirst.
For righteousness.
It's only found one place.
So, I mean, but we talked about there being a perhaps a tension in that phrase. Like, so do you feel that? Or are you on board with the whole love the sinner, hate the sin narrative?
So the I think I'm mostly okay with it. The thing that's coming to my mind right now is just even just using the word hate.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about using the word, even just using the word hate, because like, and I guess it would depend on like how we're, because like to me, hate is the opposite of love, which means it's the opposite of God, which is like why would we hate something if if God is love, then he's incapable of hate, right?
Right.
Unless you're a Calvinist.
Yeah, I mean, from that perspective, you could just say, I love the sinner. There's no need to add anything else to the end of that. I just love the sinner.
Right. And so in loving the sinner, what that means is that, yeah, you are against the thing that wants to hurt them because you love them.
Right.
Like, you don't even really need that whole hate the sin part of it, even, because if you are truly loving the sinner, well, then, yeah, you're going to have that. If you're loving them specifically in this way that God loves them, well, we know that God wants them free of whatever it is that has them bound.
Right.
Or that delusion, whatever it is that they feel like they have to live out, or that being bound by the flesh or whatever to live in the flesh, like, if God's against that, and so, but, so are we.
Yeah.
But it's because of love,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think that I'm probably a lot more uncomfortable with it than you are, just based on your response to it and but
why are you wrong?
Man, it's the way I was born.
Explain why I'm wrong.
I have brain damage.
Oh, you have been hit a lot more than I have.
I don't even know. I'm not necessarily saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that I'm more uncomfortable with it. And I
was just joking.
I know, but there are a few reasons. Like, I feel like valid reasons of why I am uncomfortable with it. The first thing is that because we even have a difficulty even describing what sin is. We've already had that conversation since we've been sitting here. You know what I mean? Like. And we all have so many different interpretations of what that is, that then taking a posture of, well, I love the sinner but hate the sin, what does that even mean if you can't even define what sin means? And because to me, when I say, like, to me, what sin, I've already kind of described, I don't see individual actions as sin necessarily as so much as those being the fruit of living in a state of sin. So to miss the mark, so what are they missing the mark of? And to me, it's missing the mark about who God is, and thereby missing the mark about who we are. It's not living in this place, this union where we are beloved children of God. It's having this delusion of who God is, that I've described in several episodes. The God of Adam's imagination instead of God as revealed in Jesus. It's living from that state. So from that perspective, yeah, I want that delusion to be destroyed. I want that delusion. I do hate that delusion but that's not the way that phrase is used. It's used to pinpoint individual actions that we may or may not like in someone's life.
Right, and that's exactly what I was just thinking is like the thing is what we're naming when we use that phrase, which I don't really ever use that phrase anyway, but like the whenever that what we're naming is behavior.
Yeah.
But so to me, while I understand what you're saying, that the
Yeah.
behavior itself is the fruit, right? It's the works that come from sin.
Right.
What so it even in saying all that, like that doesn't mean I think that I think that we can't help but recognize gone wrongness in the world. Like whenever you see uh, a couple that's been together for a long time and like one of them cheats on the other and they have children and there's a divorce and things get ugly and there's the kids are stuck in the middle and it that has like a negative impact on everyone in the family and like
Right.
that brings hurt and pain and bitterness and resentment and all these things and estrangement. It brings all these things that are negative. Like I think it's good and I think it's right to see that and see the tragicness of that and be and hate that happened.
Yeah. I would agree I mean, especially in that analogy, in that, but I mean, I guess the reason, to expound a little more on that, the reason why probably I do get uncomfortable with that phrase is it's generally not used in those contexts where it's obvious. Like, yes, you should feel angry that that has happened. You should feel that that's wrong and that you hate that that happened. But that's not the way the phrase gets used typically. We look at the way other people are living their life and we judge them for that.
Well, I don't know that judgment is inherent to that statement.
I think it is. I mean,
Maybe the way it may have been used that way.
right. And I mean, again, that's why I feel uncomfortable with it. That part of, I hadn't said it yet, but one of the things I was going to get to is because I think inherently we don't ever use that phrase about ourselves. Inherently, when we say that phrase, we're talking about somebody else. But what it does, when you use that about somebody else, it's the old phrase that when you're pointing a finger at somebody, you got four pointing right back at you. Like it ceases to understand that we're all sinners. Like you're pointing at these certain individuals saying, describing them by this manner, but like we are all sinners.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and that's why, again, the whole point of having this discussion was like, it is because there is legitimacy to the phrase. Like, I feel like you should, I'll say it, I feel like you should hate anything that's keeping someone from living out of their true identity or their true nature as an image bearer of God, as a beloved child of God. I think that is the right reaction. But I feel like the way that term has been used in the past and weaponized is why it makes me uncomfortable, and that's why there's this tension between it.
Yeah. So two things.
Yes.
Number one, you're pointing wrong. You do it like this. That way there's nothing coming back at you.
True.
Okay.
Good point.
So remember that. Keep
Just
that.
just keep the elbow bent.
Right.
I don't want you to Elon Musk me.
Yes.
Don't get us canceled already.
So thing number one, just lock that away for future. You just got a point like that. But number two is that there is that's just a difference between me and you. I think that kind of thing shows up a lot. Whereas, like, because of the way something has been used in certain context, it seems like you're just really willing to just throw it out.
Yeah.
More so than me. Whereas I feel like I want to, like, fight to hold on to these things and repurpose them, make them what they're supposed to be.
I think some things are certainly worth fighting for, but this one seems.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, but
Yes.
that is a thing. That's
Right.
that's sort of a common disagreement amongst us, I think, is like, it shows up in a lot of different areas, I think, in different conversations we've had, as far as like there, because of the way that this has been used, we shouldn't do it. Which, I mean, I don't really ever use that phrase anyway.
Right.
So I'm not necessarily saying I want to fight to keep it. But, like, I mean, but there is always something in me, though, that even though I don't ever use the phrase myself, there is something about me that is like, well, maybe we don't have to throw it out. Maybe, why can't it be sanctified and used in the way that it should, you know?
Well, and I'm not saying that you should. I just said that I'm uncomfortable with it.
Right.
I mean, I'm
Yeah.
acknowledging the tension in there, and the only reason why I even feel tension at all is because I do acknowledge that there is depending on the usage of it, there is a degree of truth to it. I think.
Yeah.
Um.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean,
If we're going to use it to judge people, if we're going to use it to point our finger at people, if we're going to use it to other people, if we're going to use it to, demonize, ostracize, all the bad things, people, then, yeah, of course,
well,
throw it out. Don't ever say it again.
that's why I actually love what you said earlier about like the just isn't it enough to just say you love the sinner?
Right, yeah.
Why do you have to add the second part to it? Because in loving the sinner, you love them. That means you're against anything that's against them, right?
Right.
But what it does is it changes the paradigm of it. Rather than focusing on the negative and focusing on the things that you dislike, the things that you would tend to judge someone for, you're simply focused on the person, the individual, and loving them. And so everything that you do and everything that you say about the person and everything that you live out in your life is directed at loving the person. It's not directed at the negative thing, the thing that you want to destroy. It's the love that you have. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
personally, I think that that's a better approach than love the sinner, hate the sin. It's just love the sinner. You don't need the end.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, but if you do that, then you can't take a portable PA system to pride parades and yell at people.
Right. Which again is why I think that's a better approach.
Why? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know that's sort of like the stereotypical thing you think of when you think of that phrase.
Yeah.
Like, for whatever reason, whenever I think of like love the sinner, hate the sin, I just picture. There's actually a specific guy that I know that does that kind of stuff all the time. That's on.
Yeah.
I've seen like shorts on YouTube, and I can't think of his name, but
Well, that's to be fair, that's the main reason probably I would say why I have such a distaste for the phrase is because of the way it's been used
Yeah.
Against that particular population of people in general. That's kind of what I was hinting at when I hinted, at most of these things that we would call sin are pretty obvious from the narrative of love your neighbor as yourself. You don't murder someone. If you do, you're not loving to that person.
right,
If you have adultery, that's not loving to your wife. Like all of these things have tangible, obvious. Like
right,
okay, yeah, it may not, depending on how you want to phrase sinful or sin itself. All of those things are pretty obviously either sin or sinful. Like, and I don't think that anybody disputes those things.
right.
But you
Yeah.
have the one topic where this phrase, the one category that this phrase is used the most against, is the one thing that is different. One of these things is not like the others. Like it's the one thing that doesn't fit that mold. It's just a completely. I don't want to say completely. I don't want to. From my perspective and what it seems to me, where all that stems from is it's like there are particular verses, handful, mind you, at that people just don't know what to do with. And so that the Bible says it, I believe it. It's a sin. And so even though it doesn't seem to, it's not like the others, we have to agree that it's a sin. And so then we hate the sin, but love the sinners. And so we apply it to that one thing.
Yeah.
And so
If that's even what those verses are talking about.
right, exactly. But I was thinking about this morning, and this was actually one of the things that was getting me fired up about this. I was getting a little bit ticked off, to be honest, on this topic, is because I could distinctly recall the clip that I posted to TikTok as a promotion of one of our previous episodes, where you were talking about, it was the Sodom and Gomorrah episode, and you were talking about how Abraham didn't just settle at like, well, God said, the word of God says it, the Bible says it, so I'm just going to believe it. He's like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like you. Like, what if it's just 40 people?
Yeah.
Like, for whatever reason, it seems like we can take that approach with some of these other, even people, like me and you who don't over literalize the Old Testament, but kind of can read into stuff like that. But when it comes to that particular topic in the New Testament, we're like, well, the Bible says it. I'm like, what? Is it that simple though? Can we not just
Right.
why is it not the same? And like
Yeah.
I'd recently was talking to someone who had been in a study, and they were talking about they come across the verse. It was a women's study, and they'd come across the verse where women aren't supposed to be pastors, right?
Right.
And this person had told me, like, somebody had spoke up, and it kind of surprised them because they were like, I think if we look at the context of this, and I don't know that this is really what they're trying to say to us today in the year 2025. And the person that I was talking to was like, oh wow, that's actually surprising and really good. And
Yeah.
but for whatever reason, we can't take that same approach to said topic at hand. You know what I mean? And
Right.
it's like that makes all that's just to say that this phrase being used aimed at that one particular population of people,
Right.
that's all factors into why it makes me so uncomfortable using that phrase. Because
Yeah.
again, in the way that we've defined the phrase, hate the sin, love the sinner. I always have to pause before I say it because now you're messing me up. I'm going to say it backwards.
Love the sin, hate the sinner.
In the way that we've just overarchingly defined that, yeah, man, it makes sense. I'm against anything that's against you.
Right.
I want nothing but the best for you.
Right.
And anything that's keeping you from reaching your full stature, anything that's preventing you from stepping into your full identity, that's keeping you from union with God, I'm against that. I hate that.
You bet your bippy.
I want that destroyed.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But it's weaponizing the phrase that makes me uncomfortable. That's the reason why I find it to be which again is why I think just the approach of love the sinner. Love the sinner, not the sin. Love the sinner. That's why loving the approach of simply love the sinner. Period. I think is the best approach.
Love the sinner
and the sin.
Yeah. I don't know. So I don't know. I feel like you just put a nice little bow on it. I had more things I was going to say, but I feel like you wrapped it up pretty nicely.
Well, thank you.
I mean, because I was going to just get into it a little bit more and then just like how I do think it's different. I don't think it is a thing that is, like you said, one of these things is not like the other.
Oh yeah, let's talk about it. Let's do it.
I mean, I was just going to say like so there are certain things that you'll hear that are negatives. Like I've heard before that same-sex couples have higher domestic abuse rates, domestic violence, which may be true. I don't know. But there's domestic violence in heterosexual relationships as well. I mean, I don't know statistically if you're more likely. Maybe that's what it is. Like maybe your same-sex couples are statistically more likely to be violent towards each other physically because maybe there's not as much of that power dynamic there that there is in a man-woman relationship. But like that's one of the things you'll hear is like that there's higher domestic violence rates. That people in that community will have higher rates of depression and suicide and things like that. But then you have to ask, like, well, why is that?
Exactly.
Like, is it because because you could say, well, they're depressed and they're suicidal because they're not living their true identity.
Right.
Maybe. Or maybe it's because they don't feel loved and accepted.
Yeah, maybe because we're not treating them very well.
Could be. So, but here's the thing, like, whenever Paul's laying out how to love your wife, right? Your spouse, he says, love them the way Christ loves the church. well, Christ loved everyone and died for everyone, and there's no longer male, female, slave, free, Jew, Gentile, all the stuff. You know, it's very. I think it's possible that two people of the same sex can have a fulfilling marriage, can love each other with an agape love, can um and be and could be an example to a straight couple of like, hey, you guys should be like us
Right.
in the way that we care for each other, and and like, I don't know, to me it is not one of those things that's super simple, and because like in all of those other examples, like, I mean, you have a choice whether you cheat on your wife or not, right? You know, like, there's choice involved. And last I checked, no one chooses. I mean, I don't know personally, but like everyone that I do know that identifies as part of that community would say that they didn't choose it.
Right.
That's just a thing that's just been true of them. It's always been true of them.
Right. I just to that point, and I said this to you last night, but it was a way that I framed it in my head that kind of like was like, well, I never thought about it like that. But like, what if somebody had convinced you today that the Bible said it was a sin to be heterosexual? What are you going to do?
Right.
You're just going to be like, oh, okay, I'm gay now. Is that how it works?
Right.
Like,
No.
do you think that's how it works?
Yeah.
Well, then what do you want them to do?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But that's the thing. Like, I think that too many of us think that it's just a choice. No, it may be a choice whether you act on it or not, but that's a different discussion.
Right.
Like, just having the attraction itself is not something that having same-sex attraction, which I guess I'm focusing more so on homosexuality than I am on trans or any of the other letters of, but
Right.
um, um, but I mean, if you're just having that same-sex attraction is not something that I don't think it's something you can control, but I guess you could control whether you acted on it or not. But then either way we slice this thing, it is different because then what you're asking is for this person to take a vow of celibacy. They're not supposed to act on that ever. I mean, we could say that there's a possibility. I don't know. So like there are stories of people that say that they've been delivered from homosexuality, and that they are now like in like a heterosexual relationship and doing fine and all this stuff, and they're praising God that they're delivered. And like, if that's the case, then like, yeah, that's cool, I guess.
Are you happy? Cool. Like,
Right. But like, we also have tons and tons of examples of that just not working. Like there was that whole Exodus International group that shut down and apologized to the LGBT community because they said that we may have helped a few people, but we hurt way more than we helped.
right. Absolutely.
And so like, I don't know if at some point you just have to acknowledge the fact that like you're putting a lot on this person that you're not asking of yourself.
Well, not even, I mean, if you want to get back to some of the stuff the Bible even says about it, like I think about like what Paul says about Paul's kind of like, well, it would be better if you didn't get married at all, but since I know that you're all a bunch of horn dogs and you're not going to be able to control yourself,
Right.
then you can get married for simply the fact that you're going to lust yourself to death.
Right.
You're going to fail because you're too lustful. So go ahead and
Yeah.
get married. Well, like, so then what are you, from the perspective of what you're asking of these people?
Right.
So you're accepting that out that Paul gave you
Right.
for yourself and your own lust and your own desires,
Right.
but you want to deny that for this other group of people because you don't like it?
Yeah, and I think that I really do think that for the most part, well, I don't know. I mean, I can only speak to the people that we know, right? Like there's no one that I know personally that hates these people.
Right.
There's no one that I know personally that hates anyone within the LGBT community, but they do think that like scripture clearly says that it is a sin, that it's wrong.
Right.
And and there is a certain like way of viewing it from like a natural perspective that I can kind of see where they're coming from, but like, oh, it's one of those things that like I don't talk about a ton
Right.
because like
That's why I was kind of letting you riff for a little bit because I feel like the people are used to hearing me talk about it. But
Well, I mean, I'm just repeating everything that I basically said in our Pride episode back in
it's,
last June.
it's been a while. We've got a lot of new listeners since then.
I mean that's where I'm at with it. Is like I don't is it a sin or not? I don't know. If it is, it's completely different than anything else. But here's what I do know. I know I love the heck out of them.
Well, and that's the thing that gets back to the whole like, is it not enough to just say I love the sinner because we're all sinners? That means
Yeah.
that's not a point, identifying a person or a group of people. We're all sinners. I love us all. Like, and it really, because I've said that to you before. Like, I mean, I've got my own personal thoughts about what is and isn't a sin. We all do, but like, I'm not judge. It's not my place to tell anybody what, like, my job, my role in people's life is to love them. Period. I trust that the Holy Spirit, it says the scripture says it's the Holy Spirit's job to convict people of their sin, right? And it's the goodness of God which draws men to repentance. So like my goal, my job is simply to show people the love of God. Period. Point blank, not to be their judge, not to hate their sin so much that it causes them to repent, because that's not the way repentance works. It's the goodness of God. And it's the Holy Spirit's job. So like you're not, I mean, I've said this a million times before to other people, but you're not going to hate people or hate their sin enough to draw them to the love of God. You're not going to do it. It doesn't work that way. We've tried that. We've tried it and tried it and tried it and tried it. And you shall know them by their fruit. It's not working.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and Paul says outright, I think it's, you know what, this just occurred to me. This is, a little ironic. One of the few sections of scripture that talks about this topic is in 1 Corinthians 6, right?
I think that's
where it shows up in one of the lists of that.
Yeah.
But isn't it 1 Corinthians 7 where Paul says explicitly that we don't judge people outside of the church? Pretty sure.
That's another one that people like to read over, though.
So, like, I mean, you can go to 1 Corinthians 6 and you can, I mean, the same thing with Romans. If you read Romans 1 alone out of context, like, yeah, I mean,
there's no greater sin of interpretation, in my opinion, than Romans, because those the chapters and verse marks were not in the original text. Those were added by scribes. So where they pause break chapter 1 and 2, completely changes.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, and so many scholars will tell you that what Paul's doing there is a specific rhetorical method,
prosopopoeia,
where it's like a back and forth. You're supposed to read it. It would be better because it was meant to be read in the first place. That's how all these letters were meant to be read. They were meant to be read aloud, to be preached, and like, so like if you were going to say it, you would have to say, like, you'd almost have to like change your voice to like, well, this person is speaking now, and then Paul is responding. Paul's interlocutor is speaking right now, and now Paul is responding to him. Will we read it as if it's all Paul saying everything that's in there?
Right.
But that makes nonsense of a lot of what he says if you do that.
Right.
So like he's
just got split personality. No big deal.
Right. So you read the end of one there where it's like all about God's judgment, and this is one of Paul's interlocutors, and then Paul is speaking, and he in chapter 2, and he says, "Who are you, oh man, to judge?"
Right.
And like you have to, if you read it in that way, then it really does change how you understand the book of Romans.
It really always changed that particular passage. Romans changed for me whenever I learned a little bit about the prosopopoeia, and I learned about like what you're describing there. And then I started reading that first part of it as if Paul was like an old school fire and brimstone Pentecostal preacher preaching to his church, talking about everything the world does, and them people out there doing this and they're doing this, and all the while, every time he gets a little closer, the crowd just gets a little, amen, hey, you get a little more fired up. You preach it, brother. He reaches a crescendo where the whole place is going nuts, and then he hits them with well, then who are you? Because you're doing you're just as much a sinner as they are.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like he works them up to this, like, yeah, those people are terrible. And then you're no different, man. Like, to me that really hammers home that whole like first part of chapter 2 of like the point isn't to judge those other people. The point is to turn inward and look at yourself.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, just to sort of wrap up the whole, and maybe I said too much, and I've probably upset people on both sides of that issue, but, I don't know. I mean, um, is it is it a sin? I don't know.
Well,
Because I don't know, I'm not gonna make a judgment on either way. Like, I'm gonna just love everybody, and you know,
and that's kind of the point is, do you need to know? Like,
right?
is it imperative for you to know if something is or isn't a sin? Like, you're not the judge, right? Your call is to love people, which again, just drop off the end part of it. Just love the sinner. That's all we need. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter how they're living their life. I love you and I support you. And
So to play devil's advocate, and it may actually be devil's advocate, but
yeah,
um, there are places in Scripture where it seems that Paul is saying that if someone is in sin, if someone, but he is speaking specifically within people within the church.
right.
Like if someone is found to be in sin, you should go to them and try to reason with them or whatever. And so, like, yeah, but that is people within the church. So I mean, I guess you could make the argument that like if there was someone that is part of the LGBTQ community and they're in the church and like they're
Right.
maybe,
Well, I mean, but
but then it's like yeah, I don't know.
I also don't think like reasoning with someone isn't the same as telling them that they're wrong or that they're living their life. Like that would be, first of all, you only do that to people that you're in a close relationship with. You're not going to
Right.
go up to someone that even if you go to church with them, you're not just anybody. This would be something like me and you. Like, I think you're doing something that's sinful, something that's wrong. Because you're my best friend, I come to you as your best friend and be
Right.
like, this, we have this conversation, we reason together, because again, that's a reasoning is two people communicating. It's not just me talking to you or down to you. You know what I mean? So like we have a conversation, and then at the end of it, maybe you agree with me, maybe you not, but I've said my piece with you. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
this is the way I see it, this is the way you see it, we don't see it eye to eye, so be it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but that's, to me, that's what reasoning is. It's not, again, it's very dependent on your relationship, first of all, and it's not talking down to someone or preaching at someone. It's a reasoning. It's a conversation between two. You have to be just as open to receiving their feedback as you are to give them your opinion.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I agree with that.
So, I mean, really, again, just to bring it back to the original phrase that we were talking about, that's what I was kind of getting at as far as like if we were going to use this phrase of like a murderer, and you were going to say, as a person, I love that person, but I hate the fact that they did this.
Yeah.
That they've taken this life away.
Yeah.
That they are now identified, for the rest of their earthly existence, they are going to be identified as a murderer. And I hate that. To me, that makes sense.
Right.
There's very little about that is objective. It's about as cut and dry. Well, that brings me to another point, actually, but it is about as cut as dry as anything else as anything can be.
Right.
So if we're going to talk about hating the sin but loving the sinner in terms like that, makes sense. But unfortunately, it generally gets used at things that are a little more objective, a little more nuanced,
Right.
and used in a way that's weaponized and ostracizes people. You know what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
but the other point that I wanted to bring back to was the point of how even the things that seem the most clear cut are nuanced, because human beings are complicated, because life is complicated. Nothing
Right.
about life is black and white, right? And it made me think about it because, I said there's about nothing that's more clear than murder being wrong. But even that has levels to it, like I always think about the example of like, say if you're in a place, like a mall or a, somewhere where there's thousands of people and someone opens fire. You can take out the shooter and it's going to be murder. You're going to be killing that person. But thereby saves the life of hundreds, maybe even thousands of other people. Like that's to me, that's not the same as just cold blood offing somebody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like even all those other things like theft. And this is like I'm not trying to say that it's right, but there are things like some people whose families they feel like they have no other choice. They're not doing it out of a place of greed or a place of uh, evil necessarily, so much as like I love my kids and they've got to eat.
Right.
A desperation. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that again, it doesn't make it right, but it's not the same.
Right.
And then, like we've used the example a few times about like adultery or someone cheating on their spouse. Like we don't know what's going on in people's houses. You know what I mean? Like we don't know. Like, that doesn't make it right. Again,
Right. That one's gets a little squirrely for me. I don't
yeah,
know if we can justify that one, but
I don't know. Maybe I mean the point being that like we want things to be cut and dry. We want things to be black and white. We want things to be this is good, this is bad, this is sin, this is not. Like that's just life isn't like that. We don't know. We don't know the intents of people's hearts. Jesus said that it's not that which goes in that defiles, but that which comes out, essentially saying that it's all about what it's all about is what the intent of the heart is. Like, where is it coming from? Is it coming from, a place of intent that's bad, or not? Like, everything has degrees to it, I guess.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of that is, yeah, some of that, to your point, is more gray.
Right.
So,
I'm always right. Don't you
um,
forget that.
not always. um, yeah. Mm, I think I'm kind of done talking about
Okay.
about loving the sinner and hating the sin. I don't think I have anything else to say about it.
Yeah, I actually really don't have any more to add to it either, other than, it's just going to reiterate it, but I'm going to say it again anyway because I feel that strongly about it. And I think it's going to be this is what I want to leave people with on this topic is the way I'm approaching it is just simply love the sinner.
Yeah.
Period.
Right. Yeah.
That's it. There's nothing else needed.
Yeah. I feel that.
And so, yeah, that's my approach and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Right on.
Um, are there other things we want to talk about?
Um,
Or, I mean, did you have more to say on it?
no. I think we said everything. I mean, there for a while I started to repeat myself because I kind of said what I needed to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we started off the show saying, like, well, I don't really know.
Right. I mean, we said a lot, but I still think that we did. Like the whole point was that it's complicated, and I feel like that we hit that.
We complicated it a
We
little bit.
complicated it. I mean, it is complicated.
Yeah.
Just like anything that involves human beings, it becomes complicated.
Right. Yeah, because we are complex folks. I had some other things that I was thinking about today that we could talk about. I don't know if we want to or not,
It depends on if they're good or not.
if they're worth talking about.
Yeah.
So I was thinking a little bit about Lent because it is Lent.
Like belly button lint.
Yes. No. I was thinking about Lent.
Lent lint.
Lent. I was thinking about Lent a little bit and like thinking about Pentecostalism and kind of thinking about traditions versus traditionalism and liturgy and all those things. And I was thinking about, how I told you about Jesus and how Jesus makes water into wine but Moses, and that's his first miracle. It's Jesus' first miracle. But the first like sign or wonder, the first miracle that Moses performs is turning the Nile into blood. So he's turning water into something also, but he's turning it into blood and not wine. Um, and how, and Jesus is really, he's retelling Israel's story, and I think that's what I see anyway a lot. I see that a lot of what Jesus does is calling back to the Old Testament, but he's fulfilling it, he's completing it, he's making it what it should have been, instead of I've talked about it before, but like in his baptism, he doesn't, the dove that Noah sends out from the ark, and that we see the dove resting on Jesus whenever he comes up from the waters, like that should make us think about Noah, I think,
And not to derail you on that, so hold your place. But I think it's also, if that's the one for one analogy that you want to make there, I think you have to include the significance that he went to find an olive branch.
right, yeah, peace,
Peace.
yeah, and he rests on Jesus, the Prince of
Exactly.
Peace. Um, and so, but unlike Noah, Jesus doesn't say, "Yeah, save me," and everyone else can go to hell. Everyone else can drown to death. No, he goes down into the waters in solidarity with those in the flood, and makes the water holy for anyone and everyone who has been submerged in it. and um and when he comes up, he isn't he doesn't sing the song of Miriam, the taunt against his enemies. He doesn't. He goes in down into the waters in solidarity with those. Miriam, I've kind of switched stories. I'm talking about the Red Sea now.
Yeah.
Whenever Moses parts the Red
Parts.
Sea, and they get to the other side of it, and is it Miriam? Is that
Yeah.
who I'm thinking of?
It's still red though. Also Red Sea.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And so they come through on dry land, and Pharaoh and his armies, they're drowned in the waters, right? Well, Jesus, again, Jesus is going down into the waters. He's not passing through on dry land. He is going down into the waters in solidarity with Pharaoh and his army. And he comes up, and he's not singing a song of taunt against his enemies. He's immediately driven into the wilderness to do battle with the enemy in this temptation, right?
The
In this,
true enemy.
right, the real enemy, because we wrestle not against flesh and blood.
Exactly.
So yeah. And so I just say all that because like I think Jesus, a lot of what Jesus is doing in the Gospels, what the Gospels are doing is retelling Israel's story and showing how Jesus completes those stories or makes them what they should have been all the time. And so whenever we see Moses, and the first miracle he does is turning water into wine, and anything that's in this water dies. It's overtaken by, I mean, because the fish that were in the water, they need water. That's why they live in the water. So you turn
That's good logic. 'Cause checks out.
so you turn the water into blood, then they're going to die.
Yeah.
So that brought death. Whereas Jesus turns water into wine, and he gives it. It's not something that. And I have a point to this. I'm circling back around to Pentecostalism and Lent and all that. But Jesus makes instead of the water being this thing that has all this life in it that then becomes death, Jesus has the water is in containers made specifically for this purpose. And he has the servants go and fill them with water, right? And then he turns the water into wine, and it's contained, and it's not bringing death to anyone, it's bringing life.
It's bringing life to the party.
Bringing life to the party, exactly. So I say all that just to say that, like, I was thinking about traditionalism and traditions, and how every church tradition has liturgy. Like, we think of liturgy as like something that's like high church, like very ecumenical. No, I mean, liturgy just means like the form or formula of your worship. Well, we have a formula
Yeah,
that we have at our church. Like,
absolutely.
we get up there, we sing at least three songs. We're going to play them for a while. If people don't seem to respond, we're going to do another one. And even if they do, we're going to do it until people aren't responding anymore, and then we're going to do another one. It's like there is a where people, as human beings, this is what made me think about it. You were talking about human beings being complicated. Like, we are human beings, and human beings, like, we just live in patterns and cycles. Like, with that, that's just what we do. And inevitably, we end up living life in patterns and cycles. And so, yeah, our worship is going to take on some sort of form. And even though Pentecostals like to think that they're immune to that, we have liturgy. We do.
Yeah.
And we have tradition. And but the difference between, and traditions are right and good, but the difference between tradition and traditionalism is a holding so tightly to those traditions and refusing to accept change.
Right.
And if you're refusing to accept change, I think that can only result in death. I don't think that real that the true movement of the spirit can I don't think it works that way. I don't think it can be contained in that way. And yet, there is another element of it, because, like, what I was thinking about is how Pentecostals we even use some of that same language, some of the Moses-y language about, like, let your Lord, let your Holy Spirit, let your presence uh, overflow in here. Let it flood this place with your presence, right?
Let it rain.
Exactly. Open up the floodgates, like overwhelm us, overcome us with this presence, right? And, like, I'm not necessarily saying that's bad, but, like, that sounds more like what Moses is doing. He's overwhelming the life that's in there with, like, this is a flow. Anything that's in this flow, this massive flow of this river, is dead now because of what he's done. And versus, like, there being a form. Jesus had these pots that were formed and shaped for this specific purpose. So this is all stuff that I was kind of thinking through, and maybe I don't even agree with myself, but it's just something I was thinking about. And so what my thinking was, though, was that I think that you have to have both. Like, I think that, like, I'm not saying that I would like the church to just be less Pentecostal, but I would like us to be more. I would like us to be more ecumenical. I would like for us to, because I think that part of what it means to be led by the Spirit is to be in conversation with, or in communion with, what the Spirit has already led the church to do for thousands of years. And in rejecting all of those traditions, I think that we miss a lot. I think that we miss, because I guess I'm sort of thinking of that in more terms of, like, what Jesus is doing. Like, there's a specific form here that's made for this specific purpose. Well, we have traditions that the church has handed on that are for this specific purposes, that do good, that do good for us. That I think that, in my own tradition, I feel like we're lacking some of that. Like, we didn't do anything for Ash Wednesday, and I guess maybe that's on me. Maybe I should have. I'm sure that, like, if I'd called Brother Steve, he would have allowed me to do something for Ash Wednesday. But, we didn't do anything for Ash Wednesday. We don't. No one's even acknowledged that Lent is a thing, you know, in our church this year. So, like,
Actually, they did just say that the kids are going to do a little starting tomorrow, like a little lead up to it.
oh, really?
I'm pretty sure that's what I read. Like a little 6 week.
Well, that'd be good.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like I think that there are forms, there are things that aren't the wild, open and free,
Right.
forms of Pentecostalism, but they're important nonetheless. And
Right.
I would like there to be um, more attention to those things, and I try to do that on my own,
Right.
but yeah, and
Yeah, that's one of the things, to your point, that is interesting about, any sort of non-denominational or Pentecostal, I guess, was the word, was the phrasing that you used, is like there is that sort of untethered freedom that you have to express yourself in worship any way that you want to or feel led to, maybe is the proper way to say that. But sometimes, yeah, you probably do, I don't want to say miss out, but maybe that's the right word. I don't know, miss out on some of the, it's not, like what you make up for in that worship aspect, perhaps you miss out in some of those other aspects.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, a lot of the people that I listen to would fall in that sort of category of like a lot of people that have been big influences on me. They sort of would be in that sort of same realm. Like if we went that direction, that like ecumenical, but also a sort of charismatic, Pentecostal mixture of that, and with more, you know, doing, doing the Eucharist every service, and doing following the church calendar and doing the lectionary, like, things like that, they're but then incorporating that into the Pentecostal charismatic sort of space. Like, I would love to do that, and I think that that's what a lot of the people that I listen to and that have influenced me a lot. That's kind of what the where they find themselves nowadays.
I had actually heard someone recently, fairly recently, not within the last month or anything, but within the last probably 6 months, some podcast I was listening to, and I don't even remember who it was that said it, but it was somebody who had been through deconstruction, and that was sort of their niche that they did, was sort of deconstruction content.
Yeah,
And that was something that they said that as they had deconstructed and now reconstructed, and they were trying to like get back into church, what they had found is that they really appreciated some of the more ecumenical high church sort of things about those kind of denominations, as they were trying to find where they fit. But the one thing that felt lacking was in the worship, like, because they came from that more of
right.
evangelical background. And so it was like just trying to marry those two worlds together made them feel like they were in no man's land, that they
Right.
didn't have a place to go.
Yeah. And that's where that whole tradition versus traditionalism thing comes in, because, like, again, traditionalism, as I'm defining it, sort of, is just like, yes, it's holding to tradition, but it's holding to it so tightly that it can't be changed, that it can't be altered in any kind of way. And so, because I think that, like, if we tried to do that at our church, I think there would be a lot of, like, there would be people that would be uncomfortable with it. There would be people that wouldn't want to do it or think that it's silly or whatever, and like that would be resistant to it, and like, why are we changing all this? We don't like change. you
No,
know
humans inevitably do not like change.
but I mean, I think that that's we're supposed to be changing. We're supposed to be growing, right?
Yeah, you
We're
would think.
supposed to be, I mean, sanctification is a process, and I think that inevitably means you're going to change, should change in some ways.
Some would say progress
Right. You're going to progress.
in their Christianity.
Right. Um, but yeah, but see, like, it's so funny because what I'm describing here is actually not progressive. It's more like taking these traditions that the church has been doing since the beginning, and just incorporating it into.
Yeah, it goes back to what you said before. Everything just goes in cycles.
Right.
So even though it may appear to be progressive from the point of view of 10 years ago. If you go back 200 years ago or more, 2000 years ago,
Right.
then it maybe isn't. It's actually regressive, but because everything moves in a circle, it moves in that cycle.
Yeah.
It's not a left to right or right to left, but it's circular.
Yeah. And I don't think after I started talking it through, I don't even know that my analogy between the water and wine and the river and the blood makes any sense. But anyway, I was just trying to use that as an analogy to talk about the difference in there being form versus like just raw, untethered flow, you know. And
My favorite part of it was that the wine brought life to the party. But I also think it goes back to something that we were talking about in our previous little conversation there that we had about the sin and sinners is intent, or what's the purpose,
right,
because what was Jesus's purpose in turning water into wine compared to like what was Moses trying to do? He was trying to intimidate. He was trying to
right, yeah,
to accomplish through his force
right,
his will to be done, right?
yeah,
Whereas Jesus actually was asked by Mary to do. It wasn't even asked; was told by Mary to do it, and he basically said, "No, I don't want. It's not my time yet," and then did it anyway.
yeah.
So whereas, it's complete opposite.
It's so funny how Jesus is about his father's business in the temple. Mary comes to find him, and he's like, "Woman, don't you know I got to be about my father's business?" And you know, she like whatever, like she is the one that is trying to prevent him, and he's the one that's like, no, I got to be about my father's business. But then in this story, it's her that's like, hey, it's time, and
Yeah,
he's like, it's not time yet. Yeah, I just think that's really funny, very interesting.
it is kind of interesting also from the perspective of like if you don't feel ready for something, like who am I? I'm not ready for this.
Yeah,
Like maybe sometimes you just need that person in your corner who's like, no, you got this. It's time. It's time. You know.
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of cool stuff in that story. Like because she knows him well enough to know that he's going to do it because it's almost like a wink wink type moment because after he says what he says to her, like she just looks at the servants and is like, do whatever he tells you to do,
Right.
you know?
There's not even a further conversation about it. It's just do what he says. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
So,
A lot of cool stuff with Mary's story, Mary's portion of the story, which is another thing that, as a Pentecostal, I feel like I missed out on.
yeah,
But yeah, I was just kind of thinking about that today, and I was thinking about how, we do have a liturgy and like, why not incorporate some of these ancient things into our liturgy?
yeah. I've thought about a little bit about some of this stuff with the courses I've been taking at Global Grace, and some of the books I've been reading, like the stuff from Torrance, and it's just like a lot of the stuff, where he's talking about some patristics or even reading Athanasius and all
Hmm.
that stuff. Like that's all stuff I've had to learn on my own. Like that was, and I'm not, I've not been non-denominational or Pentecostal my whole life. The first 18 years of my life I was Southern Baptist, but we still didn't talk about that stuff. Like I don't know anything about that
Right.
early church, the patristics, and like all of that stuff is stuff that I've had to learn on my own. You know,
Right.
which is interesting because part of learning some of that stuff is like if you've ever been someone that's in a space of deconstruction or like started to question things or like you've come across these hard questions that you're not sure what to do with, guess what? Like there's 2,000 years worth of church history. Probably somebody else has had these same questions too. Like
Yeah.
if you know these histories and like know about like what some of these writing, like it's not just that Athanasius wrote, but he was writing specifically to counter another uh school of thought,
Right. Yeah.
especially regarding like the incarnation when he wrote on the incarnation, like there's been 2,000 years worth of schools of thought that have evolved, and then it's caused these tensions within the church, and then they would have these church councils where they would talk it out, and then something may be declared a heresy or something, like, you know what I mean? So like if you're having these same questions, like there's somebody else has probably already had them. Not, I mean,
Yeah.
but we don't know that because we don't know the church history.
Right.
You know, like
Yeah.
we don't know the history of Christianity.
Yeah.
We think historic Christianity goes back 400 years. I mean,
Yeah. To me, it was just whatever was told to me. That's what I thought Christianity was. You know,
yeah,
it's like I didn't even really bother looking into what anyone in the early church had said. It didn't even occur to me to do so for whatever reason,
right.
until much, much later, so yeah. But anyway, that was sort of just a little extra
A little extra.
that I wanted to add on.
Yeah.
Something I was thinking about today,
A little freebie.
but yeah,
A little tidbit.
little tidbit. I also took a note. That's why I wish I had my notes with me. But I was listening to. I already started re-listening to that Brian Zahn book because I missed so much. And there was a quote that he gave in there from Walter Brueggemann that was really good. I wish I could remember it because he was talking about the prophetic task of the church, and I think that would be maybe a good way to end if I could remember what he said. But there was three things that he said, and I can remember the last two, but I can't remember the first one. But I don't have the list on me.
You're gonna have to leave that one
It's
as a
aggravating,
cliffhanger for next week.
I guess. Yeah. I know one thing I really do wish I could remember because I know that one of the things he said was to grieve in a society that lives in denial. I remember the first one. Okay, so the three tasks, the three prophetic tasks of the church are to one, speak the truth, or um, I can't remember if that's how it's worded or not. Speak the truth in a society that lives in illusion. So truth versus illusion. Um, Number two is grieve in a society that lives in denial. And I thought about that one earlier whenever you were talking, and I'll explain why here in a second. The third one is to express hope in a society full of despair. So, what that made me, I thought about that earlier whenever you were talking about, like with this topic, like one thing that
All three of those are pretty applicable. Yeah.
yeah, with this topic, yeah. Because there was something that you were saying earlier about like the difference between us, like maybe that, and I've said this before, but like that the difference that I pointed out between us as far as like me being, maybe I'm too quick to to be optimistic all the time and to try to bring that reform before the grief has before grieving.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um Speaking the truth whenever in a society that lives in illusion, grieving in a society um that lives in
Denial. There you go.
to grieve in a world that grieve in a society that lives in denial.
Right.
So like what I don't want to do, I don't want to live in denial that there are real problems in the church. I don't want to live in denial that this phrase that we've talked about tonight has been used for evil. I don't want to live in denial of that. I want to grieve in a world, in a society that would be in denial of those things. Like, and we're really quick to let ourselves off the hook, and we're really quick to to downplay or deny those horrific parts of our past, the church's past, and you know, and we need there is a needful part for the church to grieve in those for those in those ways that the where society is quick to deny that there is an issue at all. As the church, it's part of our prophetic task to grieve that and to speak truth to delusion and illusion,
Right.
and but also to be hopeful
Right.
in a society that lives in despair.
See, maybe sometimes that's another difference between me and you, because my first reaction isn't to restore it; it's to burn it down.
Right.
I grieve with it, but then maybe where my lack isn't so much in the grief section; it's the hope section.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So
We're focused on different elements of the
that's why we're
prophetic task.
that's why we're a good team, man. We got to balance each other out.
I think we both would agree with the first one, though.
Yeah.
We definitely want to
Well, one of the
truth versus lies.
one thing that I would agree with that you kind of hinted at, but I wanted to make it clear at least, is because you were talking about grieving um, in a society that's living in denial,
Yeah.
or that's in denial, whatever. But you phrased it from a term of like, as the church. It's not just a look at the church pointing fingers at the society around it. It's acknowledging that the church is society and part of society. We're not just looking at the denial of those external from the church and saying the church has it all figured out and we don't have any problems. That's the opposite of what you were saying. You were saying that
Right.
we've got to acknowledge and grieve, the delusions and the problems that exist within our own community.
Right. It's the task of the church, but that doesn't mean that we're immune to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which goes right along with, kind of, in a way, the whole love the sinner, hate the sin.
Well, isn't it? I can't remember where it's at, where it says that judgment starts with the house of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Judgment starts with us. Like the judgment of God needs to start with the church, and as long as we remain in denial, then we have no business trying to bring condemnation on anyone until we get our own house in order.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that could take us down a whole nother rabbit hole, because I would say, that's part of, we've talked in previous episodes about the amount of people in today's world that are leaving the church.
Yeah.
I think we're hitting on it right there. Like,
Right.
it's one of the big problems, is that it's not that we're not embracing those three prophetic tasks, but we're not being able to look at ourselves first. We're only projecting it outwards at everybody else around us,
Right. Yeah.
Not all situations and all, but in large part, from my experience and the things that I've observed. So,
Right. Well, mine, you got anything else
I don't
to add?
suppose. I don't reckon. I don't reckon.
You ready to sign off then?
Just, remember, love the sinners.
Or love the sin?
Either or.